when the Lord said homeschool. And I was like, what? Welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Jess. I am a homeschool mom of 3, and today I wanted to share a little bit about our homeschool journey and then also share with you 4 books that I have read that have really helped me in the beginning of my journey, and 3 of those really helped me in the beginning of my journey, and then a 4th one that I just read over the summer that I found really fascinating and helpful, and it's something that is going to shape a little bit of how we do things around here moving forward. So a little bit about our homeschooling journey. We never really considered fully homeschooling our kids. My husband and I are both public schooled. I have a little bit of private schooling background, but for the most part it was public schooling. And I think maybe we talked a little bit about homeschooling when our oldest was either in the womb or just a little baby. When she became old enough to start kindergarten, we decided to put her in the lottery for a charter school in our area, and she actually got in. So I was completely beside myself, and we were happy, and of course we enrolled her. And everything was going swimmingly, and our second daughter got in via the sibling lottery in the school, which would take the siblings first before pulling from the general public. So she got a seat and she went there for a couple of years, and our son also got a seat and he was ready to start school the following school year from when we actually ended up pulling our kids out of school. So all 3 of them had seats at this highly sought after, really hard to get into charter school when the Lord said homeschool. And I was like, what? I felt very clearly that he was calling us to homeschool, but I was also a little bit beside myself because I knew that meant that once I pulled my kids out of the charter school, that the chances of all 3 of them getting seats back ever again were pretty much next to 0. So it was a huge decision. It was something that I prayed over very, very hard to make sure that it wasn't some random fluke. Then I just felt very clearly that the Lord was telling us to homeschool. So I had to share that with my husband, who did not feel that same call and was, I wouldn't say not on board, but he was definitely, he was just a little hesitant, which, like I said, we're both public schooled, so he never really considered fully. I did say that we kind of touched on a little bit, but we didn't fully consider this for our kids, so it was a little bit of a scary decision. One of the books that I'm about to share, actually the first book I'm about to share, is the book that really helped him decide that this was right for our family. So without further ado, let's just get right into those books. So the first book that I want to share with you is Dumbing Us Down by John Taylor Gatto. And this is the book that really helped my husband to get on board with homeschooling. I'm not gonna lie, it really helped me too, because I was really going off of faith in the beginning, just knowing that this is what I felt like we were being called to do. And I was and am in the season of life where I'm trying to be really intentional about being obedient. So when I feel called to do something, I'm trying to just say, yes, I'm gonna do it and be obedient. And so when I was called to this, I was like, okay, cool, like we're gonna do this. It's gonna be fine, it's gonna work out. I don't really know how it's gonna work out. I have no idea what I'm doing, but it's gonna work out because it's what the Lord wants for our family. But after reading this book, I was like, holy cow, this just makes sense. This just seems like the right thing to do. So this book was written by a public school teacher. He was a public school teacher in the New York City school system for 30 years. When he accepted his Teacher of the Year award, he basically gave a speech knocking the entire system. He just talks about his experience as a public school teacher. He talks about the way that children and people in general learn and how things work and how things were kind of done back in the day, and just some hard truths about how the system works and what it's preparing our children for. Does it have their children's best interests in heart, or is there more at play? And so this book kind of answers that question a little bit. I'm not gonna lie, it's about 120 pages, and so I thought, yeah, I'm gonna get through this in just like a couple hours. It's not gonna be that big of a deal, but he is an English teacher, and it is extremely well written, so it took me a little bit longer to get through it. I found myself rereading things and really thinking things through, so even though it's only about 100 pages, it will take you a little bit of time to get through as you kind of really like digest it and understand what he's saying. But this was a game changer, and I will tell you that I have heard that from multiple families who have read this book, and just it has completely opened their eyes and drawn them to homeschooling. So if you are thinking about homeschooling but you're not quite sure, or your spouse is not quite sure, highly recommend picking this book up and giving it a read. I think it will change your perspective. So side note, 2 of the books that I'm sharing are biblical, are Christian, if you will, and then the other 2 are secular. Dumbing Us Down is the first secular one, and then the one I'm sharing at the end is also secular. So the next 2 are Christian and biblically based books that helped me along my journey. So moving along to number 2, and that is Homeschool Bravely by Jamie Erickson. So this book was life-changing for me. So as you can imagine, when I first started homeschooling, and when we first pulled them out and we filed our notice of intent to homeschool and we started getting our ducks all in a row to do it, I became extremely overwhelmed and extremely scared. One of the biggest obstacles that I had at the beginning, and I'm not gonna lie, sometimes I still have that now too, is this whole imposter syndrome. This, I'm not enough, I'm gonna fail my children, I can't do this. What was I thinking? I'm not capable of any of this. It was suffocating me. It was just stealing all of the joy from doing this with and for my children, and it just became something that was just super overwhelming, and I needed something. I needed something to help to kind of refocus my mind, to help give me the courage that I needed to do this, because I can do this and you can do this. And this book just was it for me. And you know, I want to touch on the fact that like these thoughts are completely normal. Obviously, when we're getting into something new, or our children are at stake, their education, their well-being, their future, yes, like it's super natural for us to be questioning everything, second guessing everything, you know, worried that we're not enough, worried that we're not going to be enough, or we're going to fail them. Like those are all very natural things, but they're also lies. They're lies. And they're lies from the enemy, because he doesn't want this for your family. He doesn't want your children to be in your care 24/7. He doesn't want you to have control over what is being poured into them. He doesn't want your family to be a strong, close-knit family unit. He wants to separate you. He wants to fill their minds with things when you're not paying attention. So of course, if he can cut you off right at the very beginning and just make it to where you're so overwhelmed that you don't even want to try, he's gonna do that. And so I highly encourage you to just know that. And one of the things that you should do, and that I find really helpful, is just combating those lies with truth and with scripture. And so that's one of the reasons that I loved this book. I loved that she pulled from scripture, that it was all very biblically based and God-centered about how to bring up your children and what that looks like from God's point of view. And that alone gave me the courage that I needed. But also she touched on things like just general encouragement for moms that are in this situation, because there are just a lot of external voices that pop up, whether that's your family members who are like, what are you doing? You're going to ruin your kids. Or that's like friends or doctors or whoever that you're surrounded with that just don't understand homeschooling and don't understand the journey that you're on. And being able to kind of learn that it's okay to drown that out and learn that you are capable of doing this, that you are on the right path, that you're doing the right thing for your family, was incredibly valuable for me. So hearing that from a mom who's been there, done this, you know, it was just something that I really needed at the beginning. And so when I read this book, it completely changed my life. Like I said, it changed the way that I did things, it changed my mindset, and then it changed just how I functioned in our homeschool. So when I got done reading it, I was just bold and confident and ready to tackle this homeschool thing. And I just knew that I am more than enough for this. I'm more than enough for my kids, and that we can definitely do this, and it's gonna be better than we could have ever imagined. So I'm actually noticing a trend where like I'm taking you from the beginning of my journey and then kind of just going along the process. So we talked about how we got called to homeschooling and my husband wasn't really on the same page, but then, you know, we read this book together and it just kind of changed things for us. And that was the beginning of our journey. That was the catalyst. That's when we were like, okay, we got this. This is the right thing for our family. And we're just gonna go ahead and dive in, and it's gonna be great. And then as soon as the dust settled, there was that moment of imposter syndrome. Oh my gosh, I'm not good enough. I can't do this. What was I thinking? I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, why would anybody allow me to do this? And so the second book really helped me with that. And then the next step in the journey was, I got this, I can do this. I structured everything and I was scheduling everything, and it was just this well-organized, perfect little schedule system homeschooling program that I created for my family, and it was absolutely exhausting. I felt very overwhelmed. I felt like everything had to be perfect, and because, like I said, that I was public schooled, I'm a product of the system, right? So I have this idea of how school should look, and I was really trying hard to replicate that at home, which completely defeats the purpose of homeschooling. Like I said, I had all of these systems and schedules, and we were gonna do this then, this here and that there and blah, 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 and it was just very structured. And at the beginning, it seemed to work well. Everybody was happy. I really enjoyed it. I felt like, man, I just never really knew how much I would love this, and this is totally for me, and I'm so glad that we're doing this. And then very slowly, I would say probably after the first year, going into the second year, it all kind of just started to fade, and we were like frustrated, and the kids didn't want to do things, and I was overwhelmed, and not having the flexibility to kind of move things around because I was, in my head thinking that it needed to be very specifically a certain way was really overwhelming me too, just trying to like balance life and homeschool and all the things. So I decided to read this next book that I'm going to share with you, and it's called Teaching from Rest. And this is by Sarah Mackenzie. And I feel like this book just really gave me permission to take a step back and just, first of all, breathe for a second and realize that it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be stressful and anxious, all of these things that are negative. Like, this should be a loving, happy, joy-filled thing that we're doing, because that's what it is. It really is. And we're doing this amazing thing for our children. And this is also something that's amazing for us, and it feeds us in a special way as mothers. And so reading this just kind of helped me to realize that I can do this from a place of rest. I can do this from a place of peace. It doesn't have to be anxious. It can be something that flows well with your life, that is a complement, that's part of it, really. That's totally okay, and that's how it should be. So this is one that I like to try to read every year before we start our homeschool year, but at the very least, I highly recommend reading it once, especially if you're in that place of kind of overwhelm, like, I need to do it all. I need to make sure that it's exactly so, and really just stressing yourself out. And that's not good for anybody. It's not good for you, obviously, and it's not good for your kids, because if you're teaching from a place of anxiety, from a place of stress, it's going to make you have a shorter fuse. It's going to make things just a lot more difficult, and kids oftentimes will mimic, how we behave. So if we're stressed out and we're angry and we're snappy, a lot of times our children will mimic that, and they'll be stressed out and anxious and snappy with each other and with you. And so learning to kind of create this environment of just being at peace, teaching from a place of love and rest is going to be beneficial for the entire family and for your homeschool. So highly recommend this one if that sounds like something that you are struggling with. I just found it really beautiful and really helpful, so I highly recommend this one too. All right, the last one is a little bit of a curveball. So when we started homeschooling, obviously I looked into all the different ways that you could homeschool, the different curriculums, the different philosophies, and so forth. And unschooling was one that was brought to my attention. It was one of the things that initially I found when researching homeschool on YouTube, actually. And it was a family, I can't remember the name of their YouTube channel, but I watched them. They unschool their children. They have biological children and they have adopted children. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting, but I don't think it's for me. So I am a little bit type A. I like things to be orderly. I like to have control over things, probably to a point where I shouldn't, and it is something that I'm working on. But initially when I heard that, I was like, no, that's really cool. Like, I think that's really awesome, and I think it could work for some families, but I don't think it's for me. I don't know that I could trust that my kids would actually learn anything if I just left them to their own devices. And so pretty quickly I was like, all right, cool, check, not interested, moving on. And so 2 years pass, and at the beginning of summer, this last summer, I had unschool on my mind, and I was like, okay, summer's here. I'm going to spend some time really diving into this, reading some books, really kind of seeing what it's about with an open mind, like a fully open mind, and just kind of see what happens. And so the first book that I picked up that I really, really enjoyed, and I say picked up, I actually read it. Can you say read if it's on Audible? Listen to it. I listened to it on Audible, which I love. I love, like, I don't know about you, but like putting some AirPods in and listening to an audiobook while you're doing your chores and things. I just think that that's the best. So this was one of the ones that I was listening to on Audible, so I don't have like a tangible book to show you, but it's called Unschooled. It is by, let me find the name of the author, Carrie McDonald. So I started listening to it and like blew my mind. I could not believe what I was hearing. She touches on the history of compulsory schooling, kind of like going all the way back to the beginning of our country and how things were developed, and kind of like the process of how we've gotten from where we started to where we are now, and how the system's set up and all of that. And it was just really fascinating. It was fascinating to hear. She name dropped some pretty big names who were homeschooled and unschooled, names that you would know in the scientific community and so forth. And even went as far as to mention that the person that was responsible for the compulsory schooling in our country actually didn't send his own kids, which I found that pretty interesting. So talked about the history of schooling, talked about some of the psychological ways that we learn as people and as children, and then even touching on other countries and other cultures and how their children learn and how they kind of do things as a community. That was very interesting. Kind of spoiler alert, I'm not gonna say too much, but I do want to share that one of the parts that I found that really resonated with me is that I was a very good student. I was a 4.3 GPA, straight A, graduated with honors. Really what it came down to though was I was really good at playing the game. I knew what was expected of me and I just went with it. And so I was able to do well in school and to graduate and do the things that I did because I understood the assignment, if you will. And she actually touches on that in her book, which I just found that really interesting. I was like, oh, that makes a whole lot of sense. And a lot of it, and I'm sure you can relate, especially if you were public schooled, like we learn things for a test to then promptly dump it from our memory. I can't even tell you how many times I've taught our children something and had to go back and kind of refresh myself as I was teaching them. And they would just look at me and be like, why do I have to learn this if you don't even remember it? And I would just be like, I don't know, because I said so, you know, like I didn't really have a good answer. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, well, it's a great question. Like, why do you have to learn this if you may never use it again? And so I think that's kind of what led me to the idea this summer of like, okay, let me look into unschooling and see what it's all about. Anyways, all of that to say that this was very eye-opening, and it was definitely a lot different than I expected. I think I had this idea of unschooling being more like, okay, well, good luck guys. Hopefully you learn something and figure your life out, you know? And really it's just so much more than that. That book was really fascinating. I will be doing a video very soon. My next video will be about how we are homeschooling this year, so you can see if I incorporate or how I incorporate any of that into our homeschool moving forward. Spoiler alert, I kind of do a little bit. So keep an eye out for that video. It should be coming out in the next week or so. All right, so I hope that you found this helpful. If you have read any of these books and liked anything from them, let me know down below. Also, if you have other books that you have read as a homeschool mom and you want to share those with other people, and even me, I'm always interested to hear about new and interesting books that can help me along my journey. Please drop those in the comments below as well. And I will see you next time.